I just want a second look.
Yeah, there's something about this one, isn't there? It's familiar somehow.
We think we're stuck in a specific fragment in time, and we've been repeating that same fragment over and over.
But the flirting's over, Sherlock. Daddy's had enough now.
Hello and welcome to You've Seen It Before, TV reviews with connections in mind. Stranger Things Season 2 has just dropped on October 27th. It is the second season of the series created by the Duffer Brothers, and once again follows the story of a group of kids in Hawkins, Indiana, who have recently experienced some rather intense paranormal activity with in regards to some government experiments run out of a government lab in Hawkins. And this was set 1 year after the events of the first season, and we get to once again see the fallout of those events. And we finally see that things are not quite as contained as the government has claimed, or it's not quite as over as the people of Hawkins want it to be. First, a little bit of spoiler-free review before I get into spoiler-filled analysis and such. I would say this is definitely a great, once again, a good solid series from Netflix. I would say this definitely is one of those series that is continuing its quality so far, so good. This second season has also delayed some of my fears as far as since this is set in 1984 for the second season. The first season was set in 1983. There is a bit of there was a concern for the first season that it was pushing the boundaries of where to put in fun 80s pop culture references and where to lay off. And there was concerns about whether they would be able to do that again in season 2, or they just go full on into let's reference as many 80s things as we possibly can. I would say that they definitely did toe the line again, but they did not cross over that line, and is once again fun little 80s pop culture references without being too heavy-handed. Also, one of the great things about this series is the character development. It's more specifically the way that certain characters are introduced and certain characters are paired off in different ways. One of the best things that happens in one of the best things that happens in a sequel series of, say, movies is that we can see different characters who we don't normally pair off very often. We can pair them off in certain instances and see how well they interact with each other. That's what happens in later episodes of season 2, and it comes off great. And one of the good new characters that was introduced is the character of Max. She's a middle schooler who was introduced to Hawkins Middle School, and she's in the same class as the kids in this from the Stranger Things series. She's an outsider at first, but she eventually warms up to these kids after persistence on their part, and we get to see her essentially bare her soul to these kids, and we get to see some of her motivations behind it. And even though she starts out kind of almost like a jerk in a lot of ways, she actually softens up, and there's a great character arc for her throughout this season. Also, one of the massive standouts from season 1, but also a standout in season 2, is the character of 11. Her character is continuing to evolve from what we've seen in recent from season 1, and this character development feels entirely earned and very gratifying as well. And you're going to be enjoying that. One of the things that it wasn't quite as good as I thought it would be is that it did fall into one of the temptations of a sequel series, in that some of the characters, they either basically reset themselves, meaning they have to go through essentially the same character arc as they did the first time around, or we kind of went through and put a new character in the same in a role with the same kind of role as a different character. In season 1, the character of Steve, Nancy's jock boyfriend, he has an arc in season 1 where he is kind of acts like a bit of a jerk to Jonathan, but he ends up warming up to him in a way, and he ends up being able to fight the Demogorgon, and he is also becomes more likable as a character. In season 2, I also say he kind of goes along the same route as he did in season 1, where he starts out kind of being a jerk in ways not quite as bad as the beginning of season 1, but he sort of slips back into that role, and then he has to kind of reclaim the same ground over again. So that's kind of a weak point in that regard. It was kind of disappointing to have to see similar things along those lines. And he's not the only character who essentially gets their character development reset in certain episodes or sections of the season, and we have to see them claw back to where they were before. So there's my spoiler-free thoughts on Stranger Things Season 2. Now comes the part where I get to say the rest of this video will contain spoilers of Stranger Things Season 2, as well as certain other films and TV series. There will be a full list in the description below. And if you have not seen Stranger Things Season 2 all the way through yet, and for any of the films or TV shows listed below, and want to wait until you have, stop the video at this point and then come back later. But with these things in mind, though, let's begin. So one of the main comparisons that Stranger Things has going for it is that it essentially is a love letter to the 80s, early 80s in his career, Steven Spielberg films. Most notably, E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial. This was seen very big in season 1 with a character of 11 playing essentially the role of E.T., where she's discovered by a group of middle school kids, and they have to hide her from the government, and they essentially teach her how to interact with people, and she has like telekinetic powers, and there's even a scene in season 1 where they are being chased by the government on bikes, and they have to escape them. And I can honestly say in season 2 there is a certain element of that as well with E.T. as well, but it's not quite as bad as not quite as obvious as it was the first time around. So that's kind of a good thing there. But E.T. is not the only 80s movie that is kind of getting homages, even if they're not necessarily from the same, exactly the same era as Stranger Things, Season 2. Season 2, as I said, is taking place in October of 1984, and and as just seen from the trailers and in a couple of the earlier episodes that take place on Halloween, kids obviously dress up as Ghostbusters. But there are some other 80s films that kind of get referenced in here are, especially with the character of 11, where it's seen that she can communicate with other people after she's seen an image of them, and she channels that ability. At the end of season 1, she was able to do it in a sensory deprivation tank in a makeshift swimming pool. But in season 2, we get to see her essentially do it all the time, but with the case of a TV set to a static channel or a radio set to a static channel, and she blindfolds herself, and you get to see her interact with people in that regard, which is sort of, I don't know, I'd call that a bit of an homage to Poltergeist in the fact that a child is communicating with other people through a static TV. It's a bit of a stretch there, but that's an interesting homage. Also, the character of Will, who got sucked into the Upside Down in season 1, is once again threatened by a creature from the Upside Down in season 2, going so far as to being essentially possessed by a shadow monster, or I guess it's called the Mind Flayer, eventually by the end of the season, and he essentially gets possessed by these kids to the point where his own personality is being subsumed and suppressed by this other entity. And I'd say this is somewhat similar to what we see in The Shining with Danny and his imaginary friend Tony. And at a certain point in The Shining, Tony essentially takes over and Danny is essentially gone. Another sort of trend in season 2 is that this also has a bit. The characters of Nancy and Jonathan team up once again to try to get the justice for Barb, who we know died in season 1, and in season 2 it's revealed that people don't actually know she's dead, that she's kind of disappeared, and they're trying to find her. And of course, Nancy and Jonathan know the truth, and they try to get justice for them, but the government obviously wants that to be on the down low, because if they reveal how Barb died, then that's going to expose their program. This is sort of reminiscent to WarGames, in which the characters in WarGames are two high school couple trying to get caught up in this government program, and they're essentially being on the run from the government in order to expose a danger that is that is evident for the world in WarGames, but in Hawkins in Stranger Things. Also, the season 2 sort of has a bit of a element of PTSD. It explores that theme a lot throughout season 2, especially with the character of Will, who the child psychologists are speculating that since it's about the season 2 takes place around the same time as the 1-year anniversary of the events of season 1, that it's sort of triggering a PTSD sort of reflection or recurrence of his symptoms, and this leads to certain tensions between Will and other people, his friends and his family as well. And this is sort of reminiscent of what we see in the Harry Potter series, especially from Order of the Phoenix onward, where it's after Harry Potter actually sees Cedric Diggory die, and he fights Voldemort, and from Order of the Phoenix on, we get to see him essentially in a PTSD mindset through all the 5th movie, and essentially throughout, where he's trying to say that you don't understand how I feel, and that has more layers on that as well. And also, sort of along the same lines, there's another example could be The Amazing Spider-Man 2, where Peter Parker is suffering PTSD sort of flashbacks or in guilt trips from Gwen Stacy's father, who died in the first film. Also, at a certain point in this film, you get to see the baby Demogorgons, or as they're called, the Demo Dogs, show up in the near around episode 6 or 7 of the season, and they have essentially overrun Hawkins' lab and essentially kill nearly everyone there, and it's up to our group of main characters to escape the building, but also keep these Demo Dogs contained. And this is very reminiscent of not only Aliens, in a way, where we get to see those as well, but also throw in a little bit of Jurassic Park with the raptors, and especially the part where Bob has to go into the power room in order to reboot all the doors. And all the security systems of the building, and also the 1998 Godzilla film with the baby Godzillas in Madison Square Garden, where they have to keep they have to get out of the building, but they have to keep the baby Godzillas inside. Also, with the character of Eleven, I really liked her character arc throughout, but there was the one episode that I wasn't really all that didn't find all that interesting. Or not that it wasn't interesting, but it felt like it was a bit of a detour that didn't necessarily need to be taken. Namely, episode 7, where we see how Eleven is trying to find her sister, who was also experimented upon in Hawkins' lab, and now she is on the streets of Chicago. With her own unique abilities, and she teams up with them for a brief time, but she finds that their criminal enterprise is not quite what she had in mind, and she decides to go home. And this is kind of reminiscent of, I feel like, almost note for note with the plot of Chappie, actually, where we also see a naive character comes into contact with a bunch of criminals, and they teach the criminals teach Chappie essentially their way of life, and he sort of grows up with them, but he also has a conscience that he keeps with them, and it comes out near the end as well. We're very reminiscent of the plot line in episode 7 where 11 has to meets up with his gang, and she essentially learns from them, kind of adopts their look also, but in the end she decides that she has to go home, and she kind of abandons them. Also, on a side note, that episode also features a scene where it was sort of reminiscent of the scene in X-Men First Class, where 11 is trying to pull a railroad car that's been knocked off the tracks towards her, but her sister tries to help her by saying to channel her anger and her emotions, and that actually helps them. Very similar to the scene in X-Men First Class where Xavier's teaching Magneto how to channel his emotions and to turn a satellite dish towards them. Finally, there's a couple of episodes of Stargate SG1 actually that I feel like have similar plot parallels with episodes in Stranger Things Season 2. In Stargate SG1, there's an episode where they encounter a planet full of children, and these children are exceptionally bright, but they actually don't have traditional childhoods. So O'Neill has to essentially kidnaps this little girl who was sent to Earth to help the Stargate program build a reactor, and he brings her to Colorado Springs to teach her essentially how to be a child again, have a traditional childhood. Very similar to the plight of 11 throughout most of Stranger Things Season 2, where she is essentially being denied a traditional childhood by Hopper, who essentially is doing it for her own protection in his eyes, but she is essentially being stifled, and she's not being able to live like a normal girl. So there's another episode of Stargate SG1 in which our SG1 encounters a woman in a warehouse, and she's been experimented upon by the military, by a rogue group, and it turns out she has blended human and alien DNA, and she has an alien persona, actually, that she's trying to reassert itself at times, but the human piece is still there. And the alien persona is channeling memories through drawings that this woman does. And this is similar to how in Stranger Things, Will, once he's essentially possessed by the Mind Flayer, he is channeling memories of this, or experiences of the Mind Flayer through his drawings, and that's how you get the map of the veins throughout Hawkins, literally throughout their house. So there you have it. There are the main comparisons of Stranger Things Season 2 to things that have gone before. It is a great series, and even though there are some characters that do some have essentially reset their character arcs, such as Steve and Mike's mom as well, but Winona Ryder, who there's essentially a couple episode segment where she's reduced to the woman that no one believes and is starting to go insane route, but that's fairly quick. Somewhat more disappointing to me was seeing a role switch between the kids in the party. In Season 1, it was Lucas, who was essentially kind of the jerk character, in that Mike wanted 11 to join their party, and he wanted to help her, but Lucas didn't think that was a good idea, and he kind of stormed out of the party, and he kind of came back at the end. And season 2, Mike sort of plays that role throughout the most of season 2, where when Lucas tries to bring in Max to the group, but he's having none of it because he's still hung up on 11. So that was sort of disappointing to see. But I don't know, that just didn't work for me. But one of the best scenes ever in this series, in this season, has to be from episode 2, where we see 11 flashing back to, we see flashbacks of 11 right after she escapes the Upside Down near the end, from the end of season 1, and we see her in the woods, and we see, in rather surprising fashion, her levitating and killing a squirrel by throwing it against a tree, then cooking it, and when a stranger walks into the woods and discovers her and asks her if she's alright and where her parents are, she responds by levitating the still flaming squirrel and throwing it at his face and knocking him unconscious. That was just so out of left field and what the heck that I just had to laugh at that, and that was such a great moment. So, yeah, Stranger Things Season 2 is definitely worth your attention for that moment and all the other moments in it. And thank you, and yeah, definitely go check this thing out. It's on Netflix right now. Thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate whatever audience I can get. Be sure to look for my review of Thor Ragnarok, which is coming out November 3rd. So, thank you for watching, and just remember, there's nothing new under the sun. And yes, you have seen it before.